opportunity to work with parents, and I want to extend my welcome as well to all of you. And thank you for taking this opportunity on a Saturday morning when I'm sure you have very busy lives and a lot of other things to do. We're going to talk about educating the whole child today because the whole child is more than just the academic side. There is a social and emotional and physical side to children as well. And I've been asked to talk about the social and emotional lives of children. So we're going to begin with, again, a welcoming activity. I want you to take a moment to think about a student, maybe your own child, it may be someone you've worked with, it might be a younger brother or sister or someone in your neighborhood, a relative, but someone that is near and dear to your heart. And I would like for you to think about the skills, the attitudes, dispositions, and characteristics you would like for that person to possess when they exit our school system. Take a moment to reflect on that. And then I'm going to ask you to write your idea in the chat box, and Nicole will read them off for us.
So kindness, empathy, positive coping skills, perseverance, being able to communicate with a wide variety of people effectively, resilience, empathy again, tenacious, the appreciation of diversity and cultural competence.
Well, thank you for your responses. And you may keep thinking about that, and you might want to add more to the chat box, and that's just fine. One of the things that all of you just talked about, these skills are social and emotional skills. And they are important to the well-being of youth. Moving to the next slide, I want to talk about what is social emotional learning and why it is important. I work for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, and we introduced the concept of social and emotional learning over 25 years ago. Just trying to get a photo out of the way, great. But we are not only a practice team, a policy team, and a research team. We are dedicated to and committed to continual learning. And what you have on the slide in front of you is a new and revised definition of social and emotional learning. And I'm going to ask you to read the first paragraph to yourself, please. Oops. And as you read that first paragraph, jot, please, in the chat box a word that resonates with you. Healthy, empathy, other words. Supportive.
And then health identities, I think was in there. Make responsible and caring decisions. Well-rounded person. Identity.
Thank you. All of those
Health
words
identity.
All those words are important. A couple that I do want to point out that sometimes get missed. SEL is a process, and it's the process which through all young people and adults. We tend to only want to talk about social and emotional development with young people, but it is a process that we all go through all of our lives, sharpening our own competencies. So, would you now read the second paragraph, please? And again, think about those words that stand out for you and drop them in the chat box. I see equity, authentic, trusting, empower, strong word, partnerships, collective relationships. Thank you for pointing those words out because while all of the words in these two paragraphs are important, there's some that resonate with us more than others. If you notice, the first sentence states that SEL is an integral part of education and human development, which recognizes the relational nature of this work and all the settings where this work takes place. The second paragraph highlights the importance of partnerships and co-creation of healthy and just communities, focusing on the intrapersonal, interpersonal, and institutional relationships. This new framing of the definition honors that young people have ideas about who they are, what they'd like to see, and educators can help young people grow into engaged citizens and lifelong learners. Moving to the next, we're going to look at our framework for SEL. What social and emotional learning does, it acts as a lever to co-create those equitable learning environments and inclusive cultures that foster caring relationships, actively involve all students in learning and practicing SEL. In order for that to happen in a school setting, it requires that we align our policies, our resources, and our actions to support adults in helping students learn. It also requires coordinated school, family, and community partnerships. The wheel, which you see in front of you, is not a target. It indicates that SEL is not a targeted intervention or classroom management, but it is fundamental to all students' education and a way to uplift student voice in the classroom, in the school setting, in the community, to promote agency, identity, belonging, and to celebrate their strengths and their cultural assets. The competencies are taught in the classroom. The policies and practices are developed in the school setting, at the district level, and in the community. The next slide. I want to talk a minute about each competency, and we're going to explore some bullet points under each of the competency. I want to look first at self-awareness. Now, these are examples that our organization thinks are important. This is not an exhaustive list. Other organizations add other examples to this list. But social awareness involves a deep exploration of one's own identities to better understand who we are, to know who we are as learners, what makes us who we are, and our own sense of purpose. Self-awareness includes how we understand our cultural and linguistic assets, as well as our prejudice and biases. When we are able to look at our prejudice, our biases, and recognize our strengths and cultural assets, we are more able to understand others. So going to self-management. Self-management includes how we can set collective and individual goals and take collective action to affect change. We understand that there are inequities in all systems, but there are inequities in our educational system that also need to be changed so that all students have an opportunity to have their needs met at the time they need to be met. So when we can work together, we can affect change. Self-management includes how we understand and manage our emotions, include recognizing when we're stressed and using strategies to manage our stress effectively. We also focus here on our own sense of agency, how we take initiative, how we set goals for ourselves and work toward them. But these new elaborations or examples go beyond the individual. They include working collectively and collaborating, harnessing our collective efforts and energies, and within that work, how we are planning and organizing our efforts, courageously taking initiatives and leadership roles. So these examples are not only for what our students need to learn, but how we as adults function. Moving to social awareness. Notice the examples under social awareness. This includes how we understand others, and particularly how we understand others who are different from us. I heard a lot about you wanting your students to have empathy. You wanted them to recognize cultural differences. Social awareness and the skills that students learn are skills that encourage them to be empathetic, to appreciate diversity, to understand others. We focus on how we show concern for the feelings of others and how we demonstrate empathy to others in social awareness. Social awareness also helps us to understand belonging, and all students and adults need to have a sense of belonging, to be recognized for their strengths and their cultural differences, to appreciate who they are, and to understand that all of us have different perspectives on different ideas. Social awareness and relationships are closely connected. Under relationship skills, we're talking about healthy and supportive relationships. Notice the word healthy. You might also put positive relationships. We're talking about effectively navigating settings with diverse individuals and groups. We're talking about cultural competency as being a skill that all of us need to understand. How to work together to problem solve. In relationship skills, we learn to stand up for the rights of others, to offer support and help when it's needed, and resist negative social pressures. There are times when we need to ask for help. That's a self-awareness skill. But there are also times when we need to offer help to others. Moving to relationship skills, to problem-solving skills. This includes how we work toward solutions to solve personal and social problems. There's an additional focus on consequences, not consequences just for myself, but for the collective well-being of the decisions that are made. We also are called here to consider the consequences of our decisions and actions on different groups, and to analyze and come to understanding of the problems we face. This is about working together collectively, co-creating inclusive solutions, evaluating the solutions that we have decided upon, and analyzing the impact on individuals and the institution. So these are the social and emotional skills and competencies that CASEL has developed over a period of 25 years with a lot of research and collaboration with other organizations. And we're going to talk about how these can be supported at home. Before we go into that, I want to talk a moment about why SEL works. There is compelling national evidence that many of you may be aware of, but sometimes we don't always hear the research behind the work that we're doing. We do know from a study of over 270,000 students and 213 evidence-based programs that were taught across the country to kindergarten through 12th grade, that when these skills are taught and when they're taught well, that students have better social skills, they have improved attitudes about themselves, they have more positive classroom behavior, and this was an aha moment for us, the last bullet. We learned that when these skills are taught well, there is the likelihood that 11 percentile point gain occurs on standardized achievement tests, particularly in reading and in math, because students have gained the confidence about who they are as a learner. They are more motivated. They have relationships with their teachers, and they're more likely to participate and engage. We also learned that there are fewer conduct problems, less emotional stress, and lower drug use. There are benefits for adults too. The Center for Emotional Intelligence at Yale has done a lot of study on the adult benefits. And not only are teachers less stressed when they have these competencies, they're more likely to stay in the classroom longer. We also learned from the final study, which is on the right-hand side of your screen at the lower level, that the skills, the SEL skills taught to kindergartners were followed. Those kindergartners were followed through their young adulthood. And what we learned by following and measuring the skills that those students had and used, that there were outcomes across multiple domains. First, they were more highly educated. Secondly, they had better jobs. They were not involved in criminal activity, nor did they have substance use and mental health issues. So those are the ways these skills will be developed through a lifelong process and the benefits that occur by teaching these skills. We also know from a study done at Columbia University in New York that when you invest $1 in teaching these skills, $1, there is an $11 return savings because you're not spending that money in other interventions in the school setting or in the community. That's a pretty big issue to think about, that when you do invest in teaching SEL through an evidence-based program, there is a huge savings. So SEL right now has a very high demand in every sector of our country. These are either surveys or studies that indicate the demand for SEL. The Missing Piece survey in 2013 indicated that 93% of teachers wanted a greater focus on social and emotional learning. There was a survey in 2017 called the Learning Heroes Parent Survey that indicated 3 out of 5 parents gave greater importance to their children being happy and not overly stressed than they did to doing well in school. Employers are also talking about the SEL skills that they need for their new hires to be successful in the workplace. They do not want to have to teach problem solving, communication skills, or collaboration. They want students to possess those skills so that when they are employed, those skills are present in the way they function with the relationships and they have with their colleagues and the way they do their job. So the demand is very high right now. You will notice that I have cited under each of these where you can find this information if you choose to Google it and you want to know more about the research. So now we have an overview of what is SEL and why it's important. So how can we as parents support SEL at home? As we look at social awareness, and I have put a quick definition up there, the ability to understand our own emotions, thoughts, and values, and how they influence our behavior across many different contexts. Some of the things that I'm going to suggest, again, this is not exhaustive, but at the end of this presentation, you will see some resources where you can extend your knowledge if you choose to do that. So I encourage you, have conversation about your child's strengths. So often when we sit down and have a conversation with a child, or a youth, it is about what you should have done or what you ought to do. That can become very negative. Conversation should revolve around, what are some of your strengths? What do you like to do? If you're good at soccer, what are some of the skills that you use in order to be a better soccer player? If you really like to write, what are some things that you have learned that makes you a good writer? One of the suggestions that I have found helpful, and I used it years ago with my own 4 sons that we raised. We now have grandchildren and a great-grandchild. So we're on the other side of this, but I still work with my grandchildren around their own strengths in the areas that they want to improve. I encourage making a T-chart. Sit down with students, list their strengths. Also ask them, is there an area where you would like to improve? There may be an area where you would like for them to improve, and you can have a positive conversation about that. Together, you can think about what they can do better in any kind of activity, but at the same time, build on the strengths they have. For younger children and older children, for younger children, I'd probably use a poster with faces that identify how one's feeling. For older students, you can begin developing a feelings chart that has a wide array of feelings. The 3 words that most everyone uses to identify their feelings: I'm mad, I'm happy, I'm sad. We really need to help our young people go beyond those feelings. Mad happens in a wide range of feelings. You can be angry. You can be enraged. That's entirely different from being just mad. Same thing is true about happiness and about sadness. So helping students to understand that there are specific words that can be used to identify one's feeling. Then, last but not least, model your own self-awareness. Talk about your strengths. Talk about how you have to grow your skills, things that have been difficult for you when you were their age. You know, our students think that we never did anything wrong. Our children feel that too. So it is important to discuss who you are and what you value. So these are some suggestions for self-awareness. Moving along, self-management. Managing our own emotions, our thoughts, and our behaviors in different situations. Discuss with your children the way to calm down when they are upset. Count to 10. Do some mindfulness activities, do yoga, deep breathing, exercise, listen to music. There are many, many different ways that people calm down. When my sons would come home upset about something, sometimes I would simply say, put your coat back on. Let's go for a walk. That movement, that ability to calm down before we had any kind of discussion made a huge difference. It's important for you to talk about your own skills. How do you calm down? When you're upset at work, when you're upset with each other, when you're upset with your own children, what are some skills that you use to calm down? Talk to your students, to your sons and daughters about that. Forgive me if I keep saying students. I'm so used to doing this with teachers. But talk to your students about your own strategies. Older students can be asked to research how a performer or an athlete prepares for an event. There are rituals that everybody uses to prepare and help the person get in the correct frame of mind. Debrief without judgment, and I want to underscore judgment. A situation with which your son or daughter did not manage well. Ask your son or daughter what happened. Do not ask them why. Students and our own children tend to tell us what they think we want to hear. But when you ask what happened, you're asking for something specific, and your son and daughter can identify that. Then ask, when that happened, how'd you feel about that? How do you think the other person felt? What do you think you can do to make the situation better? Could we list a couple of things? Talk about some things you think you can do? It is very difficult to talk with our own children without judging them. I can remember saying, oh, come on, I've told you 100 times not to do that. It took me a minute to realize it was not going to make a difference to tell them 101 times, 120 times, because I was owning the situation. They were not. When you sit down and talk to them without judging them, but asking them what they could do differently to manage that situation, to try to debrief it with them later, they own the solution. And it is more likely to occur and is more likely to live with them for the rest of their life. You're doing them a great service when you ask them to handle a situation and you trust them to do it well. So moving along to social awareness, the ability to understand the perspectives and empathize with others, especially those from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and contexts. So there's several things you can do here. Reading story with younger children and discuss the feelings and the way the characters show empathy or could show empathy. You can ask young children to look at the photographs in a story and determine how someone is feeling. You can also use animal stories to illustrate the feelings of animals, the expressions that our artists put on in their characters and in the animals the stories about also identify feelings. Having a discussion about a story that leads to social and emotional growth is as important as talking about the elements of the story. You can watch movies together and discuss the characters and their action. As you do that, talk about their cultural background. Talk about how they solved a problem. Talk about the relationship that they had with characters in the movie or in the story. Talk about how they treated each other. Now, when you read a story with a student or with your child, one of the things you know is that the author is going to tell you something about that character. It's going to describe that character using words. It's also going to describe that character in the story about what other characters say. So there are many, many ways in reading a story with your children that you can also help them develop their reading skills. Talk about your own cultural background, your traditions, and your history. We often neglect that. I think as a parent, I neglected that. And even if I did talk about it when my children were younger, there are times when we go to dinner with our grown sons and they ask us about our cultural background. My great grandmother's, my grandmother's great grandmother was on the March of Tears. She was one of the Cherokee women that was moved out of her home. I don't think they understood that when they were growing up, but they understand now the impact that that had on a young woman. It also is making them more aware of the Native American heritage that they also have, although it's many generations back. We also talk about the traditions as a family that we have developed with little things like the fact that I always use the good china and the good silver when we get together for a special event. We discuss different cultures of our son's friends. Do that with your own children. Discuss the different cultures of their classmates or their friends in the neighborhood. Help them understand the cultural differences and learn to appreciate those differences. Compare and contrast their traditions and their history with your own. Finally, please encourage positive use of social media. And in a moment, I'm going to give you an example of how to do that. But you can always talk to your children about saying, don't post anything on social media that you don't want the whole world to know. That's an important skill, actually, for all of us to learn. Moving to relationship skills. The ability to establish and maintain healthy, positive, and supportive relationships, and to navigate settings with diverse individuals and diverse groups. You can do this by reading a book or watching a film and discussing the relationship challenges that occur in either the film or in the book, because a good film and a good book will have relationships challenges. Not only do you want to teach your students active listening skills, they learn from what they see you do. So demonstrate active listening skills and support them by becoming a better listener. You can say, what I heard you say then. And then you can talk later about the fact, yeah, mom or dad, I'm really listening to you. I understood what you said, and I can tell you exactly what you said, and then ask the question, did I get that right? Did I understand you? Ask students to list the skills that are needed to work well with others. In the classroom, they're going to learn about working in cooperative groups. But there are other places where they have to work in cooperative groups. On the ball field, they have to work with others. If they are in a band or an orchestra, they have to learn to work with others. Those are collaborative efforts. If you are engaged in working at a food bank and you take your child along to help with that, they have to work well with others. So talk to them about the skills they need to do that. Parents are the first teachers. We support you at home with the teaching that we do, but it's important for you to also do that teaching. It's one way you can do this is to think of a family event that requires everyone to work together. Decide on the specific task that every person has to complete. Something as simple as the end of a family meal. Oh, that's another thing I want you to think about. How many family meals do you actually have together? Or do you eat in the car as you're running kids back and forth. If that's how you got together for a family meal, I would rethink that. But when you think about the end of a meal, who cleans up? Who rinses dishes? Who puts them into the dishwasher? Who clears off the table? Those are things that everyone could do. Everyone could have a role and a task, and it goes much, much quicker. Think about another family event. Suppose you're traveling together. Who has to do what tasks to get ready for that trip? Lastly, discuss situations when one has to stand up for a friend or another person. If we ever want to eradicate bullying, we're going to have to help our children understand what it means to stand up for somebody, whether they're a friend or you don't even know them. We have to understand what it means to stand up and not stand by. So moving along to problem responsible decision making, the ability to make caring and constructive choices. Discuss your family values that guide your choices and making decisions. We talk a lot about having family values. I don't know how much we really discuss those in a family. Read a book or watch a movie and discuss the problems that were observed in the book or the movie. Ask your son or daughter, could you identify that problem? What do you think the problem is? And don't disagree with them. You might have another problem from your own point of view, and you can say, that's interesting. But what I think might be the problem, let's read on a little bit more and talk about it. We may both be right. Talk about how the problem in the movie was solved. Ask your son or daughter, would you have solved the problem that way? And if they say no, well, what would you have done? And what would have been the outcome? Take an opportunity to have rich discussions with your children around what they are reading, around what they are seeing. Lastly, talk about one's values when posting on social media. And this is called a think activity that I wish I had taught my children, but social media wasn't quite as prevalent as it is now. But believe me, I've talked about it with my grandchildren. Before you post anything on social media, think about, is it true? If it isn't true, don't post it. Is it helpful? It's another consideration. What you post may not be helpful. Is it important? And is it necessary? Is this something I really need to do? Do I need to do it now? Is it important to someone? And lastly, is it kind? Now, when I asked people earlier to think about skills they wanted their students to have, kindness came up. Social media can be very unkind. And so we want our children to remember that we need to be kind in everything that we do. You can debrief problems with your children as they arise at home and discuss the impact of a solution on others. If a problem has occurred in the community, in the neighborhood, if a problem has occurred at school, you might want to discuss that and talk about a solution and the impact of that solution on others. So these are some positive things that you can do at home to help your students grow their social and emotional competencies. I want to give you some possible resources. They're links, and these are links that parents that I have worked with tell me have been very helpful. The first link comes from the Center for Resilient Children. Resilience was a competency or skill that someone named that they hoped their children would have as they grow up. The second is an educational resource, and they have a huge amount of family resources, articles, videos, suggestions. activities. The last one, edutopia.org/SEL for parents. Some of the best videos I have seen to help you understand social emotional learning and how to promote it at home occurs on that website. Before we close, because I want to close with question and answer time, I would like for you to take a moment to reflect. What ideas have you heard would you like to try this week? And what ideas might you share with other parents? So if you would take a moment to reflect, it's important to reflect before you write. An answer to these two questions, drop it in the chat box, and Nicole is going to monitor the chat box.
So while people are trying to gather their thoughts and share their ideas, I just want to say thank you, Ruth, for today's presentation. Appreciate that. So we have one that said that the think process for social media, teaching our kids to be responsible with their social media accounts, active listening. That's a good one. One made a comment regarding that they had never thought to research how performers or athletes get in that good frame of mind. And that would be something that their child would get into. So anytime we can make it relevant to our students' interests, I think that's a great way to approach SEL. So making that connection. One person posted discussing mistakes in a positive rather than a punishing way. So how do we turn it into a learning experience for them instead of a consequence? So those were some of the comments that have come through.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for attending this morning. And we have Nicole and Kevin. Kevin is a social worker and has worked with a lot of students. And then I'm also available to take your questions. So should you have questions, could you please drop them in the chat box, and we will take the last few minutes. We have about 10 minutes left to talk about the questions.
And while people are taking a couple minutes to kind of think about what questions they may have, Ruth, would you mind moving the slideshow back to the resource slide so parents would have a couple of minutes to jot down those resources?
Hold on, I will, just a moment.
Thank you.
Can you see my screen?
I can. Thank you.
It's not on the slideshow mode, but if you look at it, you can see the resources.
Yes, and it's still large enough for us to read. So thank you, Ruth.
You're welcome.
So one question was, how is this being implemented in the school and what training do staff receive? So we've done a lot of different trainings related to different pieces of SEL. I will say that the staff has received kind of this overview presentation in terms of what is social emotional learning, what are the 5 competencies as well. And then they've also received some more, some training that relates to some of the specific competencies. And so some of those trainings would include bystander training. So what to do maybe in the classroom or in the hallway when they hear inappropriate comments that might be related to gender, race, ethnicity, any of those things, and just supporting teachers and how to respond effectively and responsibly to some of those comments. We've provided some training related to the LGBTQ community and how to support students at school. Kevin, am I missing something? Can you think of some of the additional trainings that we've provided?
Sure. Like the start of this school year, myself and two of my other colleagues, we started off this school year by talking about the importance of social and emotional learning, in the context of the pandemic and, the learning. So at my end, with the School of Social Work, we have done at least 3 district-wide professional development sessions. And that's it. Even at the high school level as well, we are introducing, a curriculum, a program. It's called Strong Kids, Strong Teens. This is done at the sophomore advisory sessions. And, we have plans, of further introducing, this Strong Kids, Strong Teens curriculum, across the high school. So, to some extent, this is also work in progress, as it relates to social and emotional learning. It's really important for us to build competencies with teachers. And I'm so glad we're able to pull together this session on parents. And this is where, with the district, with us back at the School of Social Work, we can all come together to work together and enhance the social emotional learning competencies of our young people. So I'm really glad to see so many of you parents joining in this morning.
And I think also related to social awareness, we're in the middle, almost finished with a book study on culture, class, and race, which is kind of a reflective piece for teachers. There's definitely some in staff. So it's with all instructional staff, administrators, paraprofessionals, and teachers. And so it is the book on culture, class, and race. It helps us to kind of self-identify. It provides some guidance for teachers, but also helps us identify how are we responding to issues of race, culture, and SES. So that's been a really great book study. One of the questions, has there been specific training on race like there was for the LGBTQ community, given the concerns raised in this area? And so yes, I would say definitely through the book study, and there's been an overview, and we are currently working on another training. We have 2 things that Kevin and I are working on, which would be additional trainings for the staff related specifically to race. So thank you for asking about that.
And on January 4th, we had Dr. Sonia Whitaker, who came in to speak with the district, on the topic of what's race got to do with the classroom. Nicole, would you want to elaborate a little about that session?
Yeah, so that was a really great session, and it was a good session for us because Sonia Whitaker is a deputy superintendent up north, a woman of color, and she really tailored that presentation for a predominantly white district and white teachers, and really how to support students, how to have an understanding of exploring cultures, helping students own their culture, and owning just different cultures that might be present within a community. So she just did a really great job in supporting us. Thanks for bringing that up, Kevin. We have provided so much professional development this year. I'm honestly having trouble keeping track of all of the work that we've been doing.
And the work that you have been doing is critical. We all have biases. One of the biases I deal with when I go into a setting, and I've done a lot of work in CPS, I'm a white woman, I'm a Southerner, I have a Southern accent, although I've lived in this area for 54 years. I won't lose that accent because I have an auditory discrimination problem. So I think I sound just like you. So people think when they hear my voice, what can she possibly know about me? How can she possibly understand what it means to be Black? I do have an understanding of that. The maid that we had in our household raised me. So I was influenced by her for 11 years of my life and beyond. But no one knows that because we don't stop to identify, to talk about our history and how we identify with each other. But until all of us deal with our racial biases, we are not going to be able to meet the needs of every student that walks through our door. And parents have to support that in the neighborhood as well, because problems don't happen just at school. We know from what we have witnessed this year that there are a lot of problems that occur in our communities around racial injustice. So this is something that all of us have to deal with, and I applaud the work that you've been doing, Nicole and Kevin, to help your staff understand their own self-awareness, their own relationship skills, their own biases to deal with these issues. One thing that we have learned in 2020 is that there are more inequities than we have realized before. So we need the skills to close those learning inequities and open up opportunities for all of our students. Other questions, Nicole?
So one question was, how can we learn about lessons being presented in the classroom? So this parent has a third grader. So I'm going to try to remember, but I want to say about 4 years ago, we really kicked off restorative practices in responsive classroom. And so at the elementary, junior high level, it's responsive classroom, which aligns very well with Castle's framework and this idea of creating a community, being aware of other people and their feelings, promotes active listening. And so every classroom, K-5, they do morning meetings, which is an opportunity to reflect on how kids are feeling, make connections. So I would, if you want to know specifically what some of the things that your classroom teacher is doing with regards to responsive classroom and social emotional, I would reach out to that classroom teacher because there can be a little bit of variation based on what each homeroom might need. I am not familiar with the curriculum that was put with understanding emotions. Are you familiar with the curriculum that was posted in there, Kevin?
No, I'm not, but there are a lot of social and emotional learning curriculums out there, and there are lots of it out there. I think what's really important is, for those all to be aligned, with Castle's framework. And Laurie, this curriculum that you mentioned, I'm not familiar with it. I'll do some research on it. Thank you for pointing that out. I'll take a deeper look into that as well. Ruth, are you familiar with this?
What's the name of the curriculum?
Kimochis.
Oh, I am not familiar with that at all. I can also do some research around that. No, I'm not. There are a lot of social and emotional curriculums available that come from different organizations. There are also, if you look at our program guide, there are particular programs that have evidence that they are workable, that they make a difference, that students do learn these skills, that also address social and emotional issues. So that is one that has not come up, but doesn't mean it's not a good program. It may be. It's just I'm not that familiar with it. I also want to address this issue of how do we know what's being taught in the classroom? As parents, we need to rethink the questions we ask students when they come home from school. Not what did you learn today, but was there anything that happened today that made you happy, that made you laugh? Was there anything that concerned you today? What's something that you learned today that you would like to tell others about? Be specific with your questions. Did you learn something new in math today? Math was always hard for me when I was a young child. Was there anything you learned today that could help your brothers and sisters in math? So think about the questions you ask students. Have them specific, upbeat, positive. You learn a lot about what happens in a classroom by doing that. Ask what happens at a class meeting. What'd you talk about at the class meeting today? Responsive classroom and restorative practices are two of the most powerful social and emotional learning programs I've ever witnessed. So I applaud the fact that you're doing that in your district. Other questions, Nicole?
So I think there were just a couple of comments, and I do appreciate those. And so I did make a note. Parents, there was a question about how if they could use some of the same language at home to reinforce some of the terminology or language that's being used at school. And we do have a monthly social worker newsletter that goes home. And then the teachers probably tend to send out a newsletter that addresses maybe math and reading, and parents were asking if maybe their teacher could include some of that SEL in that newsletter. So I appreciate those suggestions, and I will work on that. I think those are really great comments. You know, how can we work together on this so that, you know, if there's certain language that we're using at school, you can reinforce it at home as you have some of these discussions. So I appreciate that suggestion.
Great suggestion.
Yeah. So I don't have any other questions, and we are coming right up at 10 o'clock, and it is a Saturday. I can't thank you enough for your time, giving up your time on a Saturday morning to participate. So we weren't really sure how that would work with family schedules. So thank you for making the time to be with us this morning. Kevin and Ruth, I really appreciate your time this morning and helping provide this. It was very beneficial. I took some notes for some things that I want to do with my kids. And so I hope that if you gave up an hour this morning, that you were able to find one or two things that you're able to use at home with your children. If you have questions, you can find my contact information on the district website under district staff. I am happy to get back to you as quick as I can and provide any additional information that you want. Next week, I'll work with Mr. Lynn, and we will try to get this up on the website so that you'll be able to go back through any of the slides that you would like to revisit. So again, thank you for your time this morning. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe with the potential snow coming in later in the weekend. So have a good